everyone. Welcome to the AVPN webinar on accelerating social impact through technology. I'm Kavita, Manager Knowledge and Member Engagement at the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, AVPN. AVPN is a unique funders network committed to building a high impact philanthropy and social investment community across Asia. Currently, we have over 600 members across 59 countries, and we are very pleased to have two of our members based in India speaking today. Representing Vadhwani Institute of Artificial Intelligence, we have Raghu Dharmaraju, who is the Vice President Products and Programs. And representing Digital Green, we have Krishnan Palasana, Country Director, India. Raghu will enlighten us on how we can bring the power of modern AI technology to help solve global development challenges. And Krish will tell us how Digital Green enhances farm productivity and farmers' income by leveraging technology and partnerships. Before we proceed, a few housekeeping instructions. We will not take any questions during the presentation, but will open up the floor for Q&A after the speakers have presented. Please feel free to use the console to type in your questions while the speakers are still presenting, and I will raise the questions to our speakers in the Q&A session. If you have further questions that are not answered by the end of the webinar, you can email us at india@avpn.asia. With great enthusiasm, I will now hand over the presentation to Raghu.
Thank you, Kavita. I hope everyone is able to hear me.
Yes, we can.
All right. So thanks for this opportunity. Today, I'm going to spend most of the time actually talking about two of our portfolio solutions. But perhaps a few words about the institute itself would be very useful. We were founded something like actually about 2.5 years ago. We were just a handful of people still figuring out what we really want to do with this new AI institute. We said we want to do AI for social good, but we needed to figure out a lot regarding which problems would we solve, what sort of solutions we want to build, and probably perhaps most importantly, how we should do that. And today I hope I want to spend actually most of my time on the how, because as funders, this could be quite relevant to you, especially as you think about modern technologies and how you should look for such technologies for impact at scale. With that, let me jump right in. Actually, let me also add a word about my own role. As an institute, we are set up quite unlike a typical nonprofit or a research institute. We are a lot more like a product innovation company in many ways. We have research, engineering, products, and programs. Folks might understand research and engineering well. Products is also well understood, at least in the tech space. Programs is specifically, it's a term we borrowed from the social impact world, where large-scale programs exist, such as governments and nonprofit programs. Right. So I run both products and programs. So our key goals are powering universal healthcare, eliminating tuberculosis, doubling small farmers' income. And you will recognize these as not goals of a typical AI institute, but these are actually goals that we borrowed from the countries and global SDGs actually. That's what these are based on. And of course, combating COVID is a more recent addition, right? Let me jump in on the portfolio of things that we are working on. I'll spend time on the visual weighing machine for babies, for maternal and child health, and also the pest management for cotton farming today. So let me add a couple of words about TB. We are the official AI partner for India's TB program. We are working on things such as predicting which patients are likely to drop off from treatment so that we can more proactively ensure that those patients complete treatment. We're also working on screening and diagnostics technologies. In COVID, we've been actively involved in Mumbai's COVID response on things such as planning their healthcare capacity, down to things like ventilators and ICUs, and also doctors, nurses, even ward boys. We also have a cough-based technology that we have just published on, and we are looking to deploy soon, where we've been able to get uh, really interesting results for even asymptomatic patients using solicited cough. So this requires no additional hardware. Could be any phone. Actually, in some ways, maybe no phone is required. A call center is all that's required to actually screen for patients for confirmatory testing, and that provides significant lift in terms of the total testing capacity, which is a big challenge. So how we work. The key thing we've seen is if you look at last 2 decades, adoption of technology has been quite fragmented and rather ad hoc, if you especially look from a large scale social programs perspective. And our approach is that we take a radically collaborative approach where we co-create this. And under our umbrella, while we have AI researchers, engineers, product and design, we also have brought in into our umbrella folks from the program side, and we work with administrators, implementers, domain researchers. Now, our point of view is that AI by itself doesn't actually constitute a full solution. When we say solution, it should be integrated with systems and really deliver the impact. AI research that we do is driven by the solution needs. And ultimately, we believe the power of AI is not in just solving a specific problem, but actually overall systems redesign. I mean, if you think about it, electricity didn't change the world simply because we went from steam engines to electric motors. It changed the world because beginning with factory layouts to how cities got laid out and how we organize our work and how much we stay up at night, it fundamentally did a systems redesign of our world, really, right? And that's how we think about AI. Now, what do we mean by a solution? If you are a recommender, if you're building what you might call a product or recommender system at Amazon, all your workflows and digital pipelines data is there for you. All you need to do is just plug in and start training the AI, and it plugs and off you go. You don't have to worry about whether that product actually gets delivered, right? That's because the overall system design is such that the workflows and data pipelines are well integrated, right? But this is not the case in most social programs. Not only are the workflows unreliable, you also have the issue of the data pipelines not being there or not being reliable, right? So at the very least, you want to be looking at the upstream actions without which AI cannot be used, and downstream actions that actually deliver the impact, right? So let's go in. So ultimately, to first decide which problems we pick, we use a 7-question framework. This is obviously your top level questions. As you dig deep, you get into a lot more detail, right? But this is a good starting point. Is it actually a big problem to solve? Is an AI-based solution possible? A very big question to ask. Is AI actually going to make enough of a difference? It might not make enough of a difference for 2 reasons. One is it actually is not a substantial lift on, let's say, some other rule-based method or maybe something a lot simpler. Or it could be that it won't make enough of a difference because there are other pieces in the puzzle that without which AI itself actually has no use, right? So it's important to ask that question. Stakeholders and user acceptance, whether data exists or can be collected. Many situations, data will not exist in social sector. So you have to overcome the cold start problem by building other mechanisms to get data going. Partners, both for co-creating and piloting. And perhaps most importantly, we start with actually scaling partners right up front so that we know that when this is ultimately built, there are folks ready to use this. So all of you many of you might recognize this as a register from one of our health facilities. Actually, this one is by an ASHA, and this shows birth weight. And if you are to believe this, all the babies in India would be born at exactly 2.5 kgs, or in many facilities, maybe exactly half kg intervals, right? 2 kgs, 3 kgs, etc. UNICEF estimates, unfortunately, that nearly half of all low birth weight babies are not actually correctly weighed at birth. Now, what does this mean? Low birth weight babies consist the majority of vulnerable babies out there, and that's majority of your mortality. And we have systems in place actually to provide specific counseling and care for these babies, such as home-based newborn care systems. But these systems do not actually flag up the babies into the digital pipelines that exist because of many issues. If any of you have ever used a spring balance, you will know that it might take 2 to 3 people to actually weigh a baby. Not very easy. Of course, you have supply chain issues. You have breakdown of the simple weighing machine, and not very surprisingly, misreported and fudged data. Right? Ultimately, since you can't verify it, you can't hold anyone accountable. We asked the question: how would we do this? How would we simply, use a smartphone that more and more frontline workers are getting, get a short video, and with that, not only just get weight, but other measurements too. And this is what we call the visual weighing machine. And what you see here are early results. The approach we have taken is we have a learned deformable model, and we'll ultimately be able to compress it to actually run on phones. But you have a full 3D reconstruction of baby simply from a 2D image, right? Now, turns out if you have 3D model of a baby, because of more or less uniform density across babies, you can get to weight. And of course, now you can get to other things, right? Such as head circumference and length that are also important parameters. If you think of it, this is really a first application in what you might call the phone as a window to the baby's health, right? There are other things you could now actually infer from this video in the future. We are currently at roughly 140 grams, plus or minus error. And all this was because of, we were able to achieve this because of aggressive field collection, data collection efforts in multiple sites around India. And by the end of this year, we are looking for some early field pilots now, but that's been obviously delayed due to COVID. So let's see how things go. It may be actually middle of the coming year. I'll just, so this is just another, and the really interesting thing is we are actually now able to do this even in home settings. We are beginning to get good results. You see a checkout board there for calibration, but that will ultimately go away. All we'll use is a regular ruler, the wooden ruler that you would find anywhere, right? That way you are not dealing with special supply chain issues or special equipment. It works on any phone. Ultimately, the point though is that you eliminate all the paper writing. You introduce verifiable and accountable data, timestamped, geotagged. And this is a feature that could work, that can work with any frontline health worker apps, integrated into reproductive and child health MIS systems that already exist and home-based newborn care systems. And overall actually simplify the system so that you ensure that a subset of babies that really need the care, get the care, as opposed to trying to do everything for everyone. The second, of course, is you have multi-layer accountability with dashboards and everything, where you can drill down to the specific babies that actually need care and you make sure that actually happens. Right? Now let me switch to cotton. Why cotton? Cotton turns out to be the third largest crop in India and one of the largest crops across the globe. Almost 250,000 people depend on cotton one way or the other for their livelihood. In India, especially 30 million people, that's farmers and families, right? Now, majority of these are small farmers, and doubling farmers' income is one of the biggest goals that the country has. You know that majority of distress, not majority, a lot of distress, farmer distress in the country is actually around cotton farming, right? And if you look at the cascade of actions that are required to double farmers' income, one of the big things is pest management, because there's lots of avoidable yield loss. Specifically 2017-18, the pink bollworm pest alone wiped out almost 50% of the crop in states like Maharashtra. Of course, there were a lot of farmer suicides. The reason for that is pests that were earlier thought to be not resistant to Bt cotton, which is very widely known, have now actually become resistant to Bt cotton. And it's very difficult to actually detect this before there is infestation, because the moths lay an egg at the calyx, at the base of the boll, and you can't easily find it or predict it. and it just bores in. And once it bores in, you can spray all you want, but you don't get enough result, right? So and as it turns out, there's lots of spraying that happens to combat, and almost more than 50% of India's pesticides go into cotton, and that has many harmful effects, of course. Now, farmers depend on largely extension workers for the most part for advice on everything from what to seed, when to seed, to watering, to how to take care of pests, right? And the way it works today in large-scale extension programs is that there's manual identification and counting of this pest data by this field staff. And it's inaccurate and unverifiable. And the experts sitting in the field of, head offices of programs or in universities ultimately end up giving advice that is aggregate in nature and hence inaccurate. Of course, inaccurate partly, largely also because of the identification and counting of this pests is also inaccurate. And there's delay. And delay is, as you can imagine, can be lethal at times. Now, we have plugged into the program workflows that already exist and built an application. The AI is one of identifying and counting pests. It relies on pest traps. And we've actually further simplified this for local language and easy use by low literacy users. But our first introduction point is field workers themselves and the lead farmers who we found to be fairly conversant with smartphones, right? And we've also developed AI models for offline inference, and this will provide granular villages. So there's advice, not just advice given, but this gets connected into dashboards of the program, and this is also something we built. And this serves as a surveillance tool because we know that farmers' behavior can at times be quite reactive. So they might be not monitoring these traps that very well, but the moment there is one or two alerts that come from a certain area, the program can send out an alert and make sure that folks actually look at their traps more frequently. We require them to visit the traps once a week, right? So ultimately, the goals are, of course, to increase yield, reduce costs, and educate farmers. But the big picture here is that working closely with programs, we are building solutions that can be, that can yield results sooner than later. And the key here is, of course, a variety of partnerships from Government of Maharashtra, for example, Better Cotton Initiative, one of the largest programs in the world, Umbrella program in the world. POCRA is a World Bank program. Wellspun helped us do the data collection. The Deshpande Foundation is piloting this right now as we speak. And of course, folks might know Central Institute for Cotton Research, and we've been supported by google.org. So with that, I'm going to ultimately just sum up saying ultimately it's not just about the AI, it's about AI, how AI can be integrated with the programs for transformation, right? Because reaching one farmer at a time is very difficult, but if you integrate with the programs, you start reaching millions of farmers at once. So with that, I'll hand this back.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Krishnan from Digital Green, and just want to thank Raghu and congratulate for this wonderful presentation. And he mentioned about farmers and extension service, and I'm going to start from there. So it's also a beautiful link from where he concluded. Digital Green is an international NGO. We are headquartered in San Francisco, and we have got operations in Africa, based out of our Ethiopia regional office, and in South Asia, based out of our India, New Delhi regional office. And we work across 7 states in the country, in India, right? The mission of Digital Green is to enhance farm productivity and farmers' income by leveraging technology and partnerships. So we are trying to use technology as an accelerator for achieving development outcomes. And in India, for example, we have established long-term partnerships with Department of Agriculture in many of the states and Department of Livelihoods, like for example, Jivika in Bihar, etc. And as well as in Ethiopia, we have got a long-standing MOU with Department of Agriculture. And in a nutshell, uh, so far, in about 13 years now, we are a teenager organization. We just turned 13 this year. And like any teenager, we are curious, impatient, uh, full of ideas. And that's what is driving us to find new innovative solutions for the way forward. And in this short span of time, we have been able to reach over 2.3 million farmers across different countries and in over 17,000 villages, as well as build capacities of more than 22,000 frontline extension workers. Our approach fundamentally follows three principles. Okay, the first principle is that we are farmer focused. So in every community, we begin with sitting down with the farmers, trying to do an assessment of the area, the pain points that they're having, and then try to diagnose the situation so that we can find uh, solutions and how technology can actually improve those solutions. So that's the first thing that we do. The second thing is that partnerships are very crucial for us. We don't create systems in parallel to the existing ones. For example, in all the places where we are working with the governments, both at the state as well as at the local levels, and work with the systems that are existing. So a system strengthening is an integral part of our approach. And third thing is we are very data focused. We collect, collate, analyze data. We listen very closely with the data that we are collecting and use that data both for our own program decision making as well as our partners' large scale program decision making. So these are three fundamental principles that we apply in our approach. We are farmer focused, we value partnership, and then we listen to the data that we collect. In this presentation, I'm going to focus on three parts. One is extension. Now, as Raghu also mentioned earlier, extension is one of the biggest network of the support service that is available for farmers in the country today. We have actually over 120,000 extension workers across the country, and they are reaching out to farmers on a daily basis. So how we can actually use technology to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of that agricultural extension service so that it helps production. That is one side. The second side is beyond extension. While the extension looks at the production side of it, we are now looking at beyond production, the market access, particularly for smallholder farmers, so that they can improve their net income. And the third idea, which is very conceptual at this stage, we have already working on that, is something called FarmStack, in which we are actually developing a platform that can integrate independent data sets for value optimization for small farmers. So I'll briefly present on all these three counts. One, on extension. No, the context in India is mentioned here. We have about 120 million smallholder farmers in the country. The distribution is diverse and often skewed from landholding pattern to production and yield. It varies from state to state, within states, from geography to geography. And extension is one of the most critical services that farmers are having. And extension services link farmers to information and knowledge related to production, right? And some of the issues that the farmers are facing is, in spite of such a large network of extension workers, the small and marginal farmers have low access to traditional extension service. In fact, it was as low as 7 to 8% some of the areas, but it ranges from anywhere from 7 to 15%. Only that much of farmers were able to access this service. And the perennial issue of low productivity, low yield, low income that has been happening for many years in the country. So these are some of the core issues that the farmers were facing. And the reasons can be various, the lack of relevance of the extension service, the language barriers, reduced motivation among the farmers to adopt those practices that are being promoted or advised by the extension agents. And often we can find there are generic solutions to specific problems that happen. And of course, the low reach, as I mentioned earlier. Now, how do we use technology to address these issues? Our solutions are in 3 steps, if you have to just mention that, what we did was we wanted to equip the extension agents with technology so that they can improve their extension service to farmers. So we conduct a formative research in all the communities where we work. We understand the pain points, we identify the positive deviance in the society, and develop the content or the story to address local issues. Now, why the content? Because the whole one of the solutions that we are having to improve extension efficiency and effectiveness is what we call as community videos. These community videos are videos that are produced by the community on farmers, on the problems that they are facing, and use that as the tool to reach out to more farmers. So the content is created locally, the video is produced locally. So that means that we actually train quite a good number of young people, farmers themselves, extension agents, on how to produce videos. And not only that, they are trained, we also provide them equipment. When we say we, initially we piloted with that, but right now it is being provided by the state governments. And the script production and the final video are done by that video production unit. Okay. And the third step of that is, so the first step is actually identifying the problem, developing the content. The second step is producing local videos in which there are local actors, which means the actors are the farmers themselves. And the third step is using this video to disseminate amongst farmers. So in a typical extension approach, one of the reasons why the farmers were also not able to access is because there was one-to-one interaction. The advices were often given in technical language that the farmers were not able to understand, and booklets, leaflets, etc. were actually disseminated to the farmers, which was not very motivating for them to adopt. But in the video based extension, what extension agents are doing is that they are using that small videos that are produced from the village to show it to the farmers through local events that are organized. So all the dissemination agents are provided with a Pico projector, which is battery operated handheld projectors. They put in their bag, go to the villages, bring a group of farmers to sit around and project those videos and show those videos to the farmers. The same thing that was earlier orally conveyed or conveyed through leaflets and pamphlets are being conveyed through video right now. And the typical 8 to 15 minutes video in a dissemination camp can take anywhere from 40 minutes to 1.5 hours, because there are areas where the extension agent will pause that video and engage the farmer in discussion. So they get the feedback, they collectively identify the solutions. Even there can be solutions which are beyond the video also. Thereby, there are a few things that happened. Number one, the interest of farmers went up because they are seeing something that is very close to them, which is very relevant to them. It addresses problems of their own area. It is not some problem which is very generic and then a generic solution provided to that. And the communication was happening in a language that they are very familiar with. Okay. So this way, through these 3 steps of doing a formative research, doing a video production, and then disseminating it to the video, help to significantly improve the reach and access to extension service of the farmers. And all this training that we were doing on ground, the training on video production, training on dissemination that we gave to extension workers, have been digitized right now, and it is available under the Microsoft Sangam platform. And as of today, over 4,000 extension workers are actually utilizing the Virtual Training Institute facility also. And the virtual training also provided refresher courses. And the training that we are providing, it incorporates principles of adult learning, peer-to-peer education, and of course, positive deviance. Now, once those, the traditional form was actually use those Pico projectors, organize those meetings on ground. But in the last couple of years, we have come out with multiple dissemination channels. So on-ground dissemination, which is human-mediated through Pico projectors, is happening. Many of our partners have purchased a large number of Pico projectors so that their extension agents can use them. We have also started digital dissemination through WhatsApp, Telegram, YouTube, etc. We have also complementing the same dissemination through IVR services, both call in and call out, SMS, as well as audio clips. In fact, we have more than 5,000 videos that are available in the YouTube library that we have, categorized by the crop, by the language, by the problems, by the issues, so that farmers can very easily access it. And insofar, we have got more than 60 million farmers who have accessed these videos online. Some of the experiences and lessons in this extension service is that, one, it is a proven, very fundamental, simple, adaptive technology, which is proven to be scalable and replicable. Started in India, it is now working across 20 different countries and 45 different institutions. It strengthens systems. It institutionalizes the whole approach with government partners. In fact, we have so far leveraged more than $23 million by partnering with government. It's cost effective, simple technology, relevance, localized, and people are comfortable using that. Okay, and also has got a demonstrated impact, both in terms of adoption rates, because as I mentioned earlier, not only the access to extension went from around 8 to 15% to more than 60%, and even the yield increased on an average to about 27%, ranging from anywhere from 8% to, in some cases, as high as 65%. And this is one of the most researched approaches globally. There are 45 different independent studies, including from JPAL, ID Insight, LHSTM, IFPRI, etc., that has happened on this approach. Some of the challenges that we find are there are too many fragmented options for the farmers. The problems keep on changing. That means content is the king. And to develop that content is a time-consuming effort. The motivation of the field level workers, extension workers are a major factor. There is constant dropouts. Many of them don't get salaries on time, which means that their motivation levels are often fluctuating. And the maintenance and repair of those, particularly those pico projectors, etc., is a major challenge. Some of the deeper challenges include the farmers still have to depend on the extension system to get these videos and inputs. The digital divide and digital literacy is a major factor, specifically when we talk about women farmers. Affordability for farmers, including smartphones, data connectivity, is a challenge. And last mile connectivity, where farmers don't have this access to even normal telephone, can be a problem that we need to consider. Okay, but we are moving ahead in this direction. The whole idea is that how do we now give more choice to farmers as we move along? The second idea that we talked about was beyond extension, which looks at the post-production side of it. This is one area that we have very recently started. The issues faced by farmers, again, amplified by the COVID situation that we have right now, is low returns, high transaction cost. Farmers don't have direct access to buyers. There are so many intermediaries in between, and lack of understanding and information on the market dynamics is another major factor. And of course, inability to cope with sudden stress, like in COVID situation that happened, can be a major factor. So on one side, we have farmers who would like to increase their sales, reduce their wastage and improve their income. And on the other side, there are buyers who want convenience, safety, they want value for money, and they also want transparency and traceability, and they also look for quality. Okay, how do we bridge this using technologies, what we are looking right now? And in this, there are three aspects that we are looking at. One is Farmer Connect. So how can we help farmers to use technology to improve some of their understanding, information, awareness on markets, right? Which requires farmers to have, like for example, the market looks for higher quality can fetch higher price for them. How the production side can be looked at to improve that quality and quantity, and also orient the farmers on some of those digital aspects is one side that we are looking at. The second thing, instead of these layers of intermediaries in between, we're trying to build the capacities of the farmer producer organizations or farmer producer cooperatives. We are working with them right now, and make the FPO as the source aggregator. That means the FPOs have got connection with farmers. They can aggregate the farmers produce and also thereby increase the volume and the negotiation power of farmers. And FPO also can manage the logistics operation related to these transactions, which an individual farmer might find it difficult. And FPO can also ensure that there is quality assurance and traceability. And this other side is the consumer connect, where we want to ensure that there is continued support that goes to the consumers. There is regular feedback that we receive from them, and consumers are finding the platform easy to use. So what we have developed is a web-based or a digital platform. There are three things that we are doing right now. One is using Facebook as the interaction platform between the farmers and the consumers. So consumers can actually go to the Facebook, look into the products that are available, and place order directly with the farmer producer organizations. And we are also using WhatsApp as the storefront, as the interaction platform, both for consumers as well as for farmer producer organizations. For example, the farmer producer organization will have storefront, a display of the products that are available, and the consumers can actually log in and place their order directly through the WhatsApp based platform, right? And it's linked to a payment gateway also. And the third area is, which we are currently working on, is how do we use the power of artificial intelligence and help artificial intelligence to enable both both chats and voice recognition, so that it becomes much easier, much automated, much more efficient, both for farmers as well as for consumers. These are some of the digital solutions that we are working right now. We have already have 2 use cases that demonstrated that the farmers found that their net income has actually gone by more than 15%, and their transaction costs have actually gone down. And we are currently also doing a pilot in Andhra Pradesh with this solution. And a very important thing here is that it would have been very easy for us to come out with yet another, let's say, portal, web-based portal. But what we are trying to do is use some of the most popular web-based platforms that are available in the country. Almost 90% of the smartphone users are using WhatsApp or Facebook. And how do we use this platform to engage farmers with consumers? These are some of the products that we have as a part of this market access. Kisan Dairy is a simple digital ledger for the farmer, where they can keep their transaction, and also it also provides certain value-added services. Loop One is a transport aggregation tool that we came out. It's like a Uber for farmers that we came out a couple of years ago. And Loop 2 is what I just now mentioned, using WhatsApp and Facebook as a storefront, including AI-enabled chatbots for both B2C and B2B market. Some of the challenges is we found that often there are very high operational costs to start with. We need to demonstrate manually that how the whole thing works, and the FPO capacity is also a major aspect over here. Intermediary challenge are there are too many actors, too many applications available, and farmers often get confused on what to go, where to go. And for an organization like ours, promoting and marketing the whole concept to get more consumer traction is a very key. And initial acquisitions are taking much more time. We are having discussions, but B2C component of this is yet to be explored. Can we use the same platform to connect to larger consumers and larger multinational institutions? And diversity in language, food choice, consumer behavior, etc., are another challenge. That means that we need to keep on updating the tools that we are developing. The third area is FarmStack. We are currently developing a data platform. The idea being that there are too many fragmented data that is available with too many data sources. For example, soil is available with Department of Soil, water-related data is available with Department of Irrigation, farmer-related data is available with Department of Agriculture, and many companies, private companies, even public institutions, research institutions, they're all having their own data. And unfortunately, the farmers whose data is open used by all these actors is not even aware of her or his own data asset or the worth of that data that they're holding, right? The second issue is one of the reasons is that all those people who own this data are very possessive about that. They want to ensure ownership, they want to ensure privacy, and of course, everyone wants to have the data security also. Now, considering these two, is it possible for us to come out with a platform that will help integration of these data sets, interoperability of these data sets, and sharing of this data for value addition without compromising on the privacy, security, and ownership aspect. That's what we have been developing. And the solutions that we are putting forward is very simple, that on one side, we have got organization farmers who want, who is concerned about the ownership and security of their data. And all these data are independently stored, which is not talking or communicating with each other at this point of time. It can be public, private, NGO, any actors. On the other side is the farmers themselves, that how farmers can actually get access to much more customized, tailor-made data, which can come only if all these data sets are actually able to communicate with each other, and then also have a control over the data that they want, or the data that they want to share. For example, each and every farmer should know, okay, what is that specific kind of information that I need to get from different data points, and how it can help my own productivity and income. So considering all these things, we have developed a platform, and how this platform actually works is this use case that I'm mentioning over here. For example, there is this Climacell who has weather data. They've got hyperlocal weather data. There is another organization, CIMIT, who has got soil data almost on a 200 by 200 meters surface area. And there is also a Department of Agriculture and Corporation who has got the farmers directly. Now, none of these data, they're all private, they're all independent. They don't talk to each other, right? The platform that we are offering will allow these different data sets to communicate with each other without compromising on the ownership of the data that they're having, or the security of that data that they're having. Of course, they will allow this data to be shared under certain restricted conditions. And these conditions combined together can actually, for example, in the integrated advisory that we gave to farmers on a specific issue related to cashew crop in Andhra Pradesh, we combined the weather data, the soil data, and the profile of the farmers, and gave them advanced information related to certain pests that can attack the cashew farmers sometime in November, December, January period, subject to certain hydrometeorological conditions. And we were able to provide that advanced information and advanced advisory to the farmers, thereby helping the farmers to significantly reduce the losses that otherwise they would have had. And similarly, we did this exercise in Bihar also, to help the potato farmers address the blight pest attack that they have periodically. So 3 different data sets through a platform, combining together and sending out advisory to farmers through IVR, through WhatsApp. That's the channels that we are using right now. And what we are working with, very interesting, is that instead of this going as a push message to farmers, we are also looking forward so that farmers can actually pull this message as and when they require, by combining of these 2 or 3 different data sets. It's purely on a conceptual level right now, though we have completed 2 or 3 use cases. We are in discussion with government, we are in discussion with different actors right now, and we believe that this platform can potentially transform the way we are actually looking at data and using data to inform farmers and send them much better advisories than what they are receiving right now. So again, once again, 3 things. 1, the community-based video approach that we have, which has been scaled to different parts of the world. The second is the market access initiative that we are having, where we are using platforms like Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., to connect consumers to the farmers. The third one is the FarmStat, that looks at a platform that can actually combine or integrate different independent data sets without compromising on the ownership, the security, the privacy of the data sets. So these are some of those innovations and technology interventions that we are having to help smallholder farmers. Thank you. Over to you, Kavita.
Thank you, Krish. We will now open up the floor for questions. So attendees are requested to kindly post their questions in the Q&A box. We already see there are some questions. I'll start with the first question, which is for Raghu. How is scale incorporated in terms of adoption of the innovations powered by AI in large health system across India?
Scale or scale?
Scale. How is scale incorporated in
Okay,
terms of adoption of the innovations?
sure. See, our approach is actually to look at the scale systems that already exist. For example, the HBNC system or home-based newborn care system is basically over 1 million ASHA workers and 250,000 ANMs that are really part of the home-based newborn systems, right? And more of these are actually using these frontline health workers are beginning to use smartphones. In Gujarat, for example, there's a TECO platform by Argosoft that already is used by all ANMs of Gujarat and soon is going to be scaled for all ASHAs. This is a fragmented landscape, but if I were to look forward 3 to 5 years, most of our healthcare workers will have smartphones. Second thing, there are also these apps that already exist, such as the ones I mentioned. There are also other, for example, CAS on the Anganwadi or the nutrition side in India that are already used by over 630,000 what you call Anganwadi workers in India. So the scale already exists. What we are bringing in is an AI that kind of fits into that. It might require some minor modifications of the workflows and the data pipelines, but essentially the scaled program already exists. And that's the beauty of trying to do that.
Krish, the next question is for you.
Yes.
Are there trends in terms of adoption of technology with regard to farmers from different states?
Yes, there is. In fact, we find that the states where we are working, we find increased use of technology in states like Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, where farmers are much more open in using many of them. The percentage of smartphones actually used by farmers in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh is significantly higher than the farmers in, let's say, in Bihar and Jharkhand who are using smartphones. Okay, so we do find that there's an increased appetite in some of the states. It varies by state to state on use of technology. That's absolutely right. But having said so, I also want to mention that it's quite interesting that during this COVID time, since actually March this year, the number of smartphone users in rural India and the data usage in rural India has actually outpaced that of urban India. Okay, now that's a very interesting indicator that we are having, which means that more and more people, more and more farmers are actually understanding and reaching out to technology solutions because the traditional system broke down in many of such areas. So we can which is a very positive indicator in terms of increasing use of technology among farmers. Yeah.
So the next question is actually for both of you to answer, and I think Raghu, you can start with answering. What are some key strategies used to ensure that farmers support new technologies, as farmers are often reluctant to try new technologies without seeing demonstrated positive effects right away?
You're absolutely right. And unfortunately, farmers maybe sometimes have good reason to avoid that. For example, when you have aggregated advice you give for the whole block, it's not accurate in many of those places that you're trying to apply that advice. And advisory systems, non-granular advisory systems are in some sense guilty of that. So what are the strategies? The way we are taking it is we are actually going to the extension staff and lead farmers initially, right? And the lead farmers have traditionally been relied upon. Also, it's not just lead farmers. And lead farmers, by the way, the term lead farmers, yes, it is about that village, but they're also farmers generally looked up to in communities, etc. So we've seen WhatsApp groups with pest images that farmers tell us, oh, okay, I send this to this guy, this farmer, of course, they don't use lead farmer, but someone they trust that they send to, right? So we're riding on these behaviors, basically, to introduce this technology. And we will also actually ride on the same channels of communication and trust channels to disseminate that further. And of course, so the program plays a role as well as the traditional routes of.
Krish, would you like to answer that too?
Yeah, I think Raghu has covered it well. I will also just want to add, right now, how much ever we say, when we say extension, okay, it's not just about agricultural extension. We also have similar services in health and nutrition sector also through ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers. There's a huge outreach extension system. Government has invested enormous human resources behind that, right? People are significantly dependent on the extension system right now to get those services. And one of the problems of that is that a farmer or a person might not get a solution that is specifically designed, targeted, tailor-made for that person. So it might be slightly more generic than what is accepted. So because the extension agents are actually going with an information, thinking that this will be an information that is more useful for everyone. For example, in the community video-based approach that I was talking about, if there are 20 farmers sitting and listening to that particular or watching that particular video and listening to that particular problem, not necessarily all the farmers are having the same problem at the same time. Might be only some of them might not be even interested in that crop. But because the extension agent has come, they are going to have a meeting, everyone come and sit, and half of them are not even interested in what is being talked about. Can technology actually help it make it much more personal? So instead of pushing the information from extension agents to the farmers, is there a way that in the days to come, farmers can choose what they want to listen, what they want to hear, and how can technology help them to have that choice? Can we make the community or the farmers independent of the extension system, thereby remodeling the role of extension agents to become much more technical solution providers rather than just information sharers, which are the current or mobilizers of the sector, with the role that they're playing right now. Okay, so we see the potential of technology to shift the approach from what it is now to a more empowerment approach, where technology helps the farmers to have more power to choose what they want, how they want, and when they want, rather than depending upon the extension system. Thanks.
The next question is for you, Raghu. How are the limitations of AI in terms of accuracy taken care of while using actionable insights presented to the end users? And does this communication limit the acceptance of technology?
Okay, let me put it this way. See, initially, whenever you roll out AI, you want some checks and balances, right? You want safety nets. So in our initial field trials, etc., as we are testing this AI, we always have human in the loop, even in the pilots, etc. Ultimately, whenever we generate a critical actionable advice, we'll actually also ensure that someone for the program actually reaches out to you, so that it's not simply that we have sent you some advice and we are waiting for you to call back or something. Because by the way, we provide that always, right? It's not giving just providing the advice. You'll also have a button with the phone number of the extension worker or people you want to reach out to understand, hey, I got this advice. What should I do now? If you want to talk to someone, you press that button and call or WhatsApp someone in the system. So yeah, it's I think we'll have to continue to keep humans in the loop and also have safety mechanisms in place for the most critical advice. The third thing is actually a more rigorous evaluation of things before you roll out itself. Because yes, if it worked in Maharashtra, it doesn't mean it's going to actually work in Telangana. It might not even mean that if it works in Wardha, that it will actually work in Akola, right? Those are both districts in Maharashtra, for an example, right? So these are some of the things we do.
The next question is for you, Krish. How do you measure the effectiveness of the video trainings?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I just typed down that answer to that query, but I'll just explain. There are two things. One is the assessment that happen as a part of the training itself, okay, which is the typical in any training program. You got assessment and the review that happen. That's one side of the story. But more important is, have those people who got training under virtual facility, are they able to translate that on ground with the local farmers, and are the local farmers able to adopt some of those practices based on the training that is given by the frontline workers? That is where the role of the district program managers of our partners, be it Department of Agriculture or Department of Livelihood, like in Jivika in Bihar, etc., that happens. There are regular field visits that happen. There is a constant data collection that happens from field. In fact, we have developed something called COCO, which is an open source data platform, which is collect online, collect offline, which is integrated with the government's database, which basically finds out what was the topic discussed on that day, how many farmers have actually understood that topic, and how many farmers have actually adopted some of those practices that has been presented on those dissemination that happen. Okay, so we are able to collect data related to that. That's what I mentioned earlier also. Insofar, there has been more than 50% adoption of the practices that have been promoted through the frontline workers who have received training either on ground or in the virtual training facility also, right? So there is a constant data collection monitoring that is happening on ground, and that gives us the required information, whether this training have been effective, whether this training has actually translated into action on ground.
We'll be taking one last question, and this is for you, Raghu. What scenarios are there to compensate for the lack of human touch or queries which require in-person assistance? I think this is related to the healthcare AI.
Can you repeat the last bit? Lack of human touch.
Yeah. What scenarios are there to compensate for the lack of human touch or queries which require in-person assistance?
Yeah. So actually, by the way, none of our technology quite. If I were to take the example of the visual weighing machine, it's actually in the hands of the ASHA, the frontline health workers, the ASHAs or the ANM. So they are only what do you say, moving the mobile phone over the baby to weigh the baby. And the reason we are doing that is because there is that data will get automatically updated in the system, and there are actually checks in place to ensure that appropriate care reaches the most vulnerable babies, with birth weight or low birth weight being a very important indicator of vulnerability. So the human touch is very much there with the ASHAs themselves. The counseling that they are supposed to be provided will still be provided by them. This just ensures that the most vulnerable babies do actually get that human service action.
We will not be able to take in any more questions in the interest of time. So thank you everyone for participating in this interesting session. And thank you very much, Raghu and Krish, for the wonderful presentations. We will post the webinar recording on our website by next week. So please look out for it. And thank you for joining, and have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
And thanks, AVPN, for the opportunity.
Absolutely.